We'll continue to admit people, but it's 3 minutes past the hour, and we have 4 fantastic speakers waiting to talk to us tonight, or this morning, wherever, or this afternoon. Okay, wherever you are in the world. My name is Mellissa Withers, and I'm the director of the APRU Global Health Program, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all back to part 2 of our webinar, The Ethics of AI in Health Research. We had a really fantastic first session last week. I hope many of you, I see lots of familiar faces and names coming back, so glad to have you back. And if you didn't join us, welcome. We're going to jump right in here. So I wanted to acknowledge first this is brought to you in part by data.org. So thank you so much for the support and partnership of data.org over the coming year to work with APRU and our network to further explore AI and impact data science within health research. For those of you who didn't join, I just want to say, introduce you to APRU. The Association of Pacific Rim Universities is a nonprofit network of 60+ research universities in the region. It's been around since 1997. A secretariat is located in Hong Kong, but we represent more than 2 million students and 500,000 staff. And this was organized in part by the Working Group on Bioethics, and I would like to acknowledge the leadership of our 3 co-chairs, Leander Marquez, Maria de Jesus Medina Arellano, and Alexander Atrio Lopez. So thank you once again. So today's agenda, we have, as I mentioned, 4 really great speakers for you. Thank you to the 4 of you for agreeing to talk to us. I'm really excited about this. Last week, we talked about kind of the evolution and new ways that AI is being used in health research and what that means. And we ended on a really positive note about the importance of AI being used for good, for public good. And so tonight we're exploring some new topics, and so delighted to have you all. Each speaker is going to speak for about 13-14 minutes. We'll have a couple of minutes for Q&A, just like last time. So feel free. You guys had some fantastic questions. I wish we could have gotten to them all because I actually wanted to hear all of the responses. So keep those questions coming, type those into the chat, and we'll see how many we can get to. Okay, so our first speaker for today is Cameron Stewart. Cameron Stewart is a member of the Sydney Health Law, an associate member of the Sydney Health Law, Sydney Medical School. He has degrees in economics, law, and jurisprudence. He's worked at the Supreme Court of New South Wales in Australia and has also practiced commercial law. He's been at Macquarie Law School, where he spent 10 years, including serving as dean. He also has been acting president of the Australian and New Zealand Institute for Health Law and Ethics, the vice president for the Australasian Association of Bioethics and Health Law, and is an honorary fellow of the Australian College of Legal Medicine and a fellow of the Australian Academy of Law. So I'm going to stop sharing here. So lovely to have you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Melissa, and thanks to the organisers for the invite. I really appreciate it. I'm going to say a number of outrageous things that'll hopefully provoke some questions. Given my 13 minutes of time, I won't be able to justify any of the outrageous things I'm about to say, but I'll see what I can get away with. I've got the topic of talking about informed consent for AI-assisted health interventions. By way of background, because I'm a lawyer, I tend to think about governance. So I should explain what I mean when I'm talking about governance to my colleagues in different professions and disciplines. So for us in the Australian legal profession, we talk about governance in terms of strict laws, so hard laws. For in Australia, it would be laws particularly coming from our governments. We're a federation, even though we've only got 24 million people, we've got at least 8 different governments creating laws all the time. So looking at legislation is a really important part of our job. And in addition to that, legislation in Australia is also operationalised through systems of regulation as well. So delegated pieces of legislation often given to ministerial bodies. But in addition to that, there's also lots of administrative instruments as well. So this could be procedural guidelines or standards, both ethical standards and professional standards. So it's a very complicated picture for lawyers to try and explain these things to other people. The good news is, though, we've got a good, 80 odd years of talking about health innovation in this context. And one of the messages I want to push is that there's nothing new under the sun. And AI is raising issues for us in ethics and in law, but they're not new issues. In fact, I don't think there's anything drastically different about the AI problems that we haven't already faced. So there's a lot of learnings that we can get from the experience that we've had in other areas, particularly in things like biobanking and stem cell technology. So health technology are always raising these same sorts of issues. And if you look at the sort of generation pathway for health innovation, and I've just got a basic outline there of the things that we'd be looking at. So going from the questions of who has permission to innovate, how do they get funded, how do we involve people in innovation, how do we monitor them, etc., and all the way through to payments and benefit sharings, etc. These are the same problems for all the health innovations, including AI-assisted healthcare. So we shouldn't think that we have to reinvent the wheel. I've simplified what I think are the problems of health innovation into this basic chart. And I've done this with my colleagues, Wendy Litworth and Ian Kerridge, who are bioethicists working from Macquarie University. And basically, I think we could, if we really want to simplify it, perhaps dangerously simplify it, but we'll dangerously simplify it for the purposes of today. We can talk about problems of rigor. We can talk about problems of representation. Talk about problems of responsibility. And this is what AI is facing, but it's facing it in a way that's very similar to other health technologies we're facing as well. And again, the message is we can learn from our previous experience. And when we're talking about informed consent, which is my topic, I think we're really focusing on issues of responsibility. And if I was to tell you, why are we concerned about informed consent, I have to give the lectures to the medical students at Sydney Uni, and they're asking me, why is this important? I'd say, look, informed consent is a mechanism for the spreading of risk between you and your patient, between organisations and their clients. And it's a mechanism that particularly has a common law focus coming out of the tort of negligence. So the common law countries like the US and Canada and other British Commonwealth countries like Australia, we have this shared tradition of looking at responsibility in negligence and saying, well, has there been a standard of care met by that professional? And that's the way we tend to use that legal mechanism for spreading out responsibility for harms. In the case of informed consent, it's based around ethical values of respect for the person, particularly the patient, but also respecting their autonomy. So there's two different traditions there that both come together to make informed consent a requirement for the professions when they're providing health interventions. And AI-assisted interventions would be treated exactly the same and have the same sources of responsibility. One of the interesting questions that comes up for lawyers is, well, who sets the standard for what information is provided? And there's two basic standards that are used across the common law world. One of those is a health profession-based standard. So we leave it totally up to the health profession to determine what kinds of information about risk they give to patients. So that's usually based on a particular notion of the kinds of iatrogenetic harms that they've come to understand over a period of time, or it might just be general risks that are always inbuilt into those types of therapies, unavoidable risks. And those would be the ones that would be ordinarily communicated. It's usually based on, if it's good, it'll be based on, broad population-based data with thousands of interventions, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes you don't have that data. So you've just got to do the best you can based upon the kinds of data that are available. A good controversy at the moment coming out of Britain and Australia is like the data around risks for intervening in teenagers who've got gender dysphoria. So using hormonal blockers, for example, puberty blockers, there's not a lot of great evidence for that. So there's lots of disputation at the moment about what the standard of care should be and what the risk provision should be. In other countries that have common law traditions, not just the health profession standard that's used, they also include subjective elements. So it's concern about what a particular patient may be worried about, not just what is ordinarily provided. It may be some extra risks, some other risks that aren't normally provided because a patient has asked or because the patient has presented in a particular way. So this is the way that the common law sort of spreads out risk between patients and particularly doctors when we're suggesting a person should have an intervention. When we look at AI, to give you an example then of the problem of how this is affected in AI, it's one of the problems is that we often don't know how the AI is coming up with suggestions and how it's doing its job. And this is referred to as the black box problem, and it was talked about last time and mentioned last time as a problem. So I'm going to use this as an example of why everything under the sun is not new. So the black box problem, is one that's raised all the time in discussions about informed consent for AI. And it's repeated and repeated and repeated. We can't give informed consent to an AI-assisted intervention because we don't know how the AI is making a decision, because the algorithms are changing all the time and we can't keep track of that. So this has created a lot of angst for people. So we need to do informed consent. We can't do informed consent because of the black box problem. I think that's a total wrong way of thinking about it. And I think partly it's got to do with the fact that these criticisms are coming not from an understanding of the history of informed consent. It is not about providing a patient with all the information, because usually we don't have all the information. This is not a new situation. We've had many situations where we provide treatments to patients and we have no idea how the mechanism works. This was the case for aspirin for a long time. We had no idea what the mechanism was for aspirin, but we knew that it was useful for doing a whole heap of types of interventions. We could still give and get informed consent because we could talk to the patient about the fact that we didn't know how it worked, but we knew that it had these particular risks and we knew that it had these particular effects. And that's why we were suggesting that they use it. This is part of what I call the Dick Cheney problem. How do we categorize risks? Dick Cheney's very famous vice president who came up with a 3-stage risks with these are the risks that we know, these are the risks that we know we don't know, and these are the risks that we don't know we don't know. And all of those are classically involved in health interventions. There's always stuff out there that we don't know. And informed consent doesn't require doctors to turn you into a specialist. That's not what informed consent is about. In fact, there may be a situation where a patient goes, I don't want to know. And if it's a subjective-based risk assessment, a patient-based assessment, and a patient says, I don't care about the risks, I don't want to know about it, legally, at least in Australia, that would be a satisfaction of the duty of care to do an informed consent. It's not informed at all. It's deliberately ill-informed, but it's what the patient wanted. We respect their autonomy. So I think we've got to be careful not to conflate a lack of information and a lack of understanding about the mechanisms for AI with impossibility of getting informed consent, because that's never been what the informed consent standard requires. So we can still get an informed consent, but it's one based on what we know. And if the answer is that the AI is going to be doing things and we won't know exactly why, but these are the risks of that, this is what's going to happen with your data, etc., then we are getting an informed consent according to ethics and according to most of our legal systems. I know it's dangerous to generalize across a dozen legal systems. What are the kinds of risks that we're talking about? We're talking about misdiagnosis, prognostication, risks of iatrogenesis, that we could do the intervention and it causes you to be sick, doctor-made sickness. So risks of bias. Now, this is often raised in the context of AI. AI is going to be based on data sets. They may be concentrated on particular sexes or races or whatever, but that's the same risk that we've got now for health data. That's not a new risk. This is a embedded risk in the whole structure of our healthcare system. There's a real problem of embedded racism in the way that we collect data. So that is a problem. I'm not downplaying it as a problem, but I'm downplaying it as an AI-only problem. And in addition to that, there's also the risk that your data is going to be used in ways that you don't really understand. And again, that's not new either. We've had these big piles of health data sitting around in public health systems, for example, and people are getting access to them, it's not a problem for that AI is unique to. These are problems that we have set up solutions for, and mostly the failure of those solutions has a lot more to do with political will than it has to do with the actual structures of the particular health intervention. All right, so summing up then, and I think I'm doing a pretty good job of keeping on time, Mellissa. I think that we just need to be careful not to overemphasize the uniqueness of the problems of AI in healthcare. And we have got so much tried and tested approaches to the problems of health innovation, and that we should really be thinking about that now. Because what we do know from health innovations is they tend to take off, particularly when they've got a lot of potential. They'll take off very quickly, and the people that are doing them aren't necessarily schooled in the legal and ethical requirements. And a lot of pain and suffering can be avoided if we front end the ethical discussions and we front end the legal discussions whilst the innovation is starting to take off. Of course, I'm completely preaching to the converted here about that, but I suppose it's a part of the proselytizing that we want to do as bioethicists and lawyers, is that we need to get out in front of this, and we need to be talking to the developers to let them know that we have the tools. We have the ability to make sure that their AI-assisted interventions are going to be both legally acceptable and ethically mandated. So I'll hand it back to Mellissa.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic, right on time. And I like the idea of thinking about, you know, not just the risks, certainly risks, but also thinking about kind of the benefits as well. So let's stop your sharing, and Leander Marquez is going to handle some Q&A for you, right on time.
Thank you, Mellissa. Hello, Cameron. So, hi. So we have a question here. It's not exactly related to health research, but it can be also related in a way. So basically, the idea of the question is, what if a certain algorithm is responsible for determining the kind of protection or the level of protection given to people or patients, and it leads to harm? So are the people who used the algorithm responsible for it?
Yeah, this is a big question. So responsibility for harms is one of the areas that I'm particularly interested in as a former civil litigator. I would come up with a particularly Australian response to that, and to say, you know, the problems of responsibility in tort law are based on the fact that tort law is a medieval concept of responsibility through adversarial blame. And it's not really suited to this kind of problem. A much better approach would be to follow the Kiwis and to adopt a system of no-fault compensation. So if we're going to be using AI and there's going to be problems of recognizing responsibility for harms, one way around that is to stop using fault as the basis of attributing responsibility. So we could do that by creating a social insurance scheme, and we say, okay, for all the AI interventions, there's this level of insurance that has to be paid that goes into a no-fault compensation scheme so that people can get compensated regardless of how the harm was generated. So we don't end up spending all this energy, we don't have all this economic waste when it comes to attributing responsibility for harm. So that's called the Woodhouse scheme. It's part of the accident compensation scheme that they have in New Zealand. They don't have personal responsibility in tort law for negligence, for personal injury. So that is something that we could do. And you could do that through taxation, and it might be a particular tax that's put on AI interventions, or it could just be a general society-wide tax. There's ways of doing it. This is where I'd call on my health economics buddies to come up with a scheme. But that is a social model, which, you know, politically maybe not as popular in present times. With some governments that we have. But I think that's probably the best way of dealing with that problem, is let's just get rid of fault, because it's a particularly dumb way of attributing responsibility.
We have a related question. So the issue is that we do not know the magnitude of the risks. So how would that be calculated?
Well, again, in terms of informed consent, that's going to take a while. So we're going to need to do the interventions and build a data set. But that doesn't mean you can't say that to the patient. Like, we don't know the risks. So this is back to the Dick Cheney problem. In the communication with patients, look, we're using AI, it's new, we don't know the risks, we know this kind of risk, we know a little bit about that, we know nothing about these other things. But if the patient accepts that and takes it on, that's a form of, that's legally and ethically considered to be an informed consent. And in fact, maybe we need to reclassify it, not necessarily informed. It's really about responsibility for risk. Has the person taken responsibility for the risk of those things? In Australia, the High Court actually hates the term informed consent. It says it's not informed consent. It's a duty to communicate material risks. Unfortunately, that's a real mouthful. It's a lot easier just to say informed consent. So we just say informed consent. But I think the High Court's onto something. Maybe it needs to be rebranded.
A final question. Do you see any convergence internationally on a minimum consent standard for AI applications in healthcare?
Yeah, this is a really good point. So one of the things that about having informed consent is both the standards, patient-based and physician-based standard, are going to be based very heavily. The courts are going to rely very heavily on what physicians are doing. So the more that groups of physicians in particular areas using AI get together and set standards, that will be adopted as the legal standard. That will be adopted as the ethical standard. So again, getting in front of this is really important. Getting groups of really smart people in a room together and setting up a standard for these interventions is going to be key. If you do it in the absence of that, the courts are going to make up their own rules, and usually they're going to be bad. So because the courts aren't doing this, they don't know what, they're judges, right? They're not doing these interventions. So a good example, I think, of this comes from Singapore. They have an AI council that's looking at health interventions. They meet all the time. They're constantly updating their ethical guidelines on this. That sort of iterative process is what we need. And we're seeing some of that happening in different spaces. But I think what we need is particular subspecialties to collectivize here and get together and start putting this putting this together in a way that can be shared internationally. Because again, the problems are going to be the same all over the place. And rather than us all like hamsters going crazy in our own little wheels, if we got together and had international based standards, we work together to create them, that's going to be stronger. It's going to be faster, hopefully, once we've set up a network. And I think long term, it'll be more useful.
Thank you so much, Cameron. Mellissa?
Yes, thank you so much. That was an interesting take from a law perspective on the topic. Thank you for being here. So now we're going to move to our second speaker for today. So let me introduce you to Dr. Jay Shah, who is the Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Responsible Health Innovation and Assistant Professor in the Department of Physical Therapy at the University of Toronto. He also has a cross appointment to the Institute of Health Policy, Management and Evaluation, and serves as the Research Director of Artificial Intelligence, Ethics and Health at the University of Toronto Joint Centre for Bioethics. So welcome, and I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for being here today. May I ask, does this, we'll go full screen. Does this look like the correct screen you're seeing, Mellissa?
Yes.
Thumbs up. Okay, very good. And big thanks to Cameron for that very engaging talk. I'm going to aspire to do the same with my time, so we'll move fairly quickly through the slides. I'll start by saying I'm giving this talk from Toronto, Canada, the traditional territories of the Seneca, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. These are First Nations communities in Canada that are still thriving and well. So the talk I'm going to give is, titled "It's Solving the Right Problems with AI for Health," but it is about kind of posing these bigger questions about where are we pointing AI? What kinds of problems are we assuming that AI can solve? And I'll give a bit of context about, sort of the near-term impacts of AI. I'm thinking more specifically about public health here, but many of these same arguments apply to health services, and these are, within a context of health innovation. I think the pipeline that Cameron presented around, the role of research and innovation together in producing these kind of products, innovations, and services as well. These come together in an ecosystem in important ways. So I'll set a bit of context about applications of AI and this kind of evolving context around public health, and then outline a series of questions in these three domains. First is around power, control, and benefit. Second, around matching solutions to problems. And third is around understanding impacts. So, the take that I'm providing here is at a different level than what we just heard, but I think is somewhat complementary. And I'll offer some conclusions around communities and governance. So thinking about the potential immediate value of AI, I mean, certainly we see applications of AI having real potential to address various issues in public health. And these have been fairly well addressed with some, highly cited work outlining like what are some priorities for applying AI by public health organizations and in public health practice more generally. AI as a technology, of course, it's general purpose. It can do a wide variety of things, and so is well suited, in particular, to many of the prediction tasks that are found in public health, as an example. And at the same time, applications of AI shift the context in which public health as a practice takes place. This is a paper published last summer by a large group of international authors on the likely impact that generative AI will have on socioeconomic inequalities and links to policymaking. And perhaps no surprise, they come around to the point of suggesting that because generative AI will sort of further concentrate resources and financial benefit, it will, in fact, deepen socioeconomic inequalities over time. And, of course, that shifts the task, the challenge of public health policy and practice, which seeks as a sort of foundation to address those inequalities. So yes, there are these applications that are exciting for AI in public health and healthcare, and also the broader industry of AI will, evolve the context in which the public health and healthcare take place. So this first set of questions around power, control, and benefit are, I've stated them here on the slide. First, who benefits from building AI directly and indirectly? And second, who controls the AI resources? And in the way that I do my work, in some ways I sort of serve the role as an official opposition. Like the point is to pose questions to power in order to think critically and more deeply about the kinds of investments we are collectively making as societies. And there are two authors, kind of two pieces that have been really foundational for me in my thinking about this. One is a piece by Hakan Ozalp and colleagues with the title Digital Colonization there, that looked at how big technology companies gain entry into healthcare and education. And through sort of the large body of documentary evidence, they identified this four-step process that essentially begins with offering sort of data storage and infrastructural solutions, and ends in the development of data-intensive innovation products that are then sold back to healthcare entities. And the second piece there by Tamar Sharon and colleagues kind of carries that into the next step by thinking more deeply about what does that mean? And one of the things that they point out is that as healthcare services come to rely more deeply on technologies and their logics, their ways of working that come from the technology sector, this shifts the way that healthcare systems operate. And that raises a number of questions around, the longer term impacts of the digitization of healthcare, and in particular, the reliance on data intensive health innovation. And so, looking at the immense power held by big technology companies in particular, certainly it bears, it's worthwhile for us to pose critical questions about, who benefits, to look at conflicts of interest in healthcare AI, and think deeply about how we can mitigate those conflicts to ensure that efforts to build AI for health are focused on public benefit and the public interest. So on to the kind of next set of issues, matching solutions to problems. And this really revolves around this notion of technological solutionism or techno-solutionism, which is fundamentally the idea, the belief that technology can and should solve all problems. And a couple of questions, I would say are closely linked to this concept of technological solutionism. Do we really need AI for this? And what do communities think about a particular AI initiative? And that piece will come back toward the end of the talk as well. So, again, a touchstone for me in my thinking about technological solutionism as it relates to healthcare is this 2021 article by author Cheryl Holzmeier, Beyond AI for Social Good, thinking about social transformations, not tech fixes for health equity. And sure, certainly there are sort of pieces of big social problems that can be addressed by prediction technology. But there are also much more foundational social economic issues. If we look, for example, at cities experiencing housing crises around the world right now, this is about much deeper issues than ones that can be solved by enhancing prediction. So, this piece and this way of thinking encourages us to think more broadly when thinking about solving social problems beyond technology. And in some work that I've done with some colleagues, we took that idea and thought about home and community care, and specifically personal support workers, as we call them in Canada, also called sort of health aides or home care workers, people who go into the home to help primarily older people living with disabilities to remain independent at home through light homemaking, cleaning, cooking, groceries, bathing, and so on. An incredibly sort of strained workforce, very high demand, difficult work to do, and there has been recently lots of technology kind of thrown at this problem. And here we sort of reiterate, try to clarify the point that without deeper investment in more personal support workers, this problem cannot be solved. There are ways to clean up efficiencies around the edges, enhance matching technologies between a worker and a patient, for example, or a client. But ultimately, the problem, the sources of the problem lie much deeper. So, the idea of channeling this critique from technological solutionism is to keep in mind that we also need to pay attention to the foundations of the issues we're trying to address in public health and healthcare as well. Onto the third and final sort of domain here is, back to this question that was raised after the first speaker around harms. How should we be thinking about harms? What are the benefits and harms? And how should those harms be governed? And here, I'm channeling some more recent work that looks at sort of hidden harms or longer term harms. These are, of course, much more difficult to govern in any meaningful sense, particularly when they're, I won't use the word speculative, but rather anticipatory. There are steps that to be laid down that produce a path dependence. When you lay one stepping stone down and two down, all of a sudden you're going in a direction, and being able to anticipate where that direction goes and the impacts, for example, on the climate crisis. These are important pieces of thinking about the broader, longer term possible harms of AI and what that might mean for governance in the present day. Certainly a thorny issue, but one that warrants great attention. Now, how should benefits and harms be governed? Here I point to a piece of work I did with a colleague at University of Warwick, Sharifa Sekalala, proposing this concept of health data justice, suggesting that doing this work kind of ethically in a foundational way means going back to decisions about which data are generated and collected and how they're used, and that doing deep community engagement in that process is what's necessary to carry a sort of health justice, social justice perspective forward. So onto my final slide, just to kind of reiterate, I talked about the broader context around AI having certain use cases in public health, but also shaping the context in which public health takes place, outlined questions in relation to power, control, and benefit, matching solutions to problems, or this idea of technological solutionism, and understanding impacts. And my concluding thought is that working with communities, particularly people who are by convention excluded or marginalized from these conversations, really seems to me to be the most obvious starting point in mitigating against these more challenging, thorny, longer-term harms that we may anticipate arising from the sort of ongoing digitization of healthcare, and particularly large-scale AI technologies. So I'll stop my comments there and stop sharing screen and pass it back, I guess, to Leander Marquez. Yeah, is that okay?
Yes, thank you, Jay. So a really very interesting question that you raise is, do we really need AI, or we just want it because it's already there? So there's a question for you here. What would be good checks and balances to limit overuse of AI or technology?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, a really challenging question to answer. And, probably many of you have better ideas than I do about this, because I think it's really application dependent. This is one of the things that I've kind of struggled with in my work on AI, is that, a prediction algorithm that makes it possible to staff an emergency room or emergency department in a hospital to a near perfect degree. The issues that surround that are completely different from an algorithm that predicts prison recidivism, or whether a parent cohort, a parent group dyad is capable of parenting a foster child. The degree of sort of severity of those decisions are very different. And so the kinds of checks and balances on those, I think would be very different. And I would say there simply needs to be good bioethics, ethical, legal, social analysis of each of these applications or application clusters to identify, what those sort of checks and balances should be in different domains. So that would be my thought. And I'm sure, others add reflections in the chat if you would. That's a great question.
Thank you. For those of us who doesn't know, what does decolonization of data mean in practice?
Yeah, I mean, the growth in dialogue around decolonization, since especially 2020, decolonization of global health, of public health, I think has really raised understanding about what that concept is, what it means to decolonize. And in my understanding, it rests on a recognition, and a definition of what colonialism is, and how colonialism relates to data. And colonialism being the broader effort to take one way of seeing the world and the power that comes with that, and impose it on sort of in new spaces, and in order to reinforce the cycle of generating power and wealth for the sort of source, typically nation. The idea of digital colonialism is that there are entities, less so nations and more so corporations, that are going places, taking data and using that to build technologies that sort of further surveil people and develop wealth and power for those corporations. So a decolonization of data, or a decolonial approach to data, would be about resisting that cycle, resisting the colonial sort of reality, particularly from big technology corporations, and doing sort of having alternate practices around data collection. Not relying on sort of big technology infrastructure and corporate practices, but rather sort of going rogue, living offline in some ways. And there are moves, counterculture moves around a new internet and, alternative social media platforms and so on. So, decolonization or decolonial takes on data, I would say, are those that resist that kind of colonial practice of surveillance capitalism, I would say.
Thank you so much for your time, Jay. I'll turn over the floor to Mellissa.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm glad that we raised these topics in this webinar. Importance. Okay, I am delighted to introduce you all to Dr. Catherine Zhou, who is a teaching associate in the Office of the Dean of Engineering at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Prior to this, she worked at the Center for Learning Enhancement and Research at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. She has a PhD degree in computer science and engineering, currently focuses on research postgraduate student education. Her teaching and research interests include research in integrity and ethics and students' mental health. She's in charge of the Research Postgraduate Student Professional Development Program within the School of Engineering and is interested in student-centered teaching and learning and e-learning. And I have had the delight and pleasure to work with Dr. Zhou in teaching over, about 10 years now. So thank you for being here to talk to us today.
Thank you, Mellissa. Just share my screen here. Okay, so please let me know if you have any tech problem or cannot see it. Okay, so in the next 10-11 minutes, I'm going to share some of my thoughts about Gen AI's impact on this on publication ethics. Well, in the past 2 years, we have heard a lot of conversations, discussions, and arguments even about how AI impacts our research practices, such as fake papers generated by AI, which encourages paper mills, copyright issues. Well, we want to say that Gen AI did not just started existing 2 years ago. It has been there for quite some time. In 2021, Nature published this article talking about how reviewers identify fake papers through tortured phrases, which were generated by AI. And in this table, you can see those common terms in computer science were turned into something that we're not totally we're not familiar with at all. Okay, so then 2 years passed, or even more years passed, and we thought after several more years training, Gen AI, this technology could be improved. But as many colleagues discussed, today we still have a lot of challenges, limitations, risks regarding this technology, like what we talked about last week or this week. This is mainly due to Gen AI's nature. This technology is not a search engine. It is based on a training data set and an algorithm. The technology predicts what we want to get from it without understanding the content, what it really means. So even today, some issues still exist, like incorrect information, especially like fake references, fake publications, fake citations, or this technology is not capable of anything specific. Like in this example, I asked GPT-4o regarding the copyright of my teaching materials based on our university's IP policy, and it gives me a totally incorrect answer. So in 2023, a lot of researchers immediately voiced that Gen AI, this technology, is not capable of anything very specific or highly technical. It is weak in terms of logic, inaccurate in terms of truth, not critical in terms of data elaboration, not novel at all. But all these features, we need all of them in our research and in our research publications. So in 2023, UNESCO published this guidance, telling us we should never ever accept the information provided by Gen AI at face value, and we should always critically assess it. In terms of public health, if we have any incorrect information or manipulated information in our research publications, that could put the public health at risk. Well, besides text or the general output from chatbots, and today we have another challenge coming back to us. Before the end of 2022, research integrity experts tried really hard and made great progress in terms of encouraging researchers and authors to use clean images in research publications. But with this technology available to the general public, now this challenge could come back to us. So in this study, 450 researchers were asked to tell real images apart from AI-generated images, and human eyes success rate is about 50%. And then they use a software called Proofake to do the same job. And Proofake is AI powered, and its success rate is about 98%, close to 100%. There's another software called Image Twin, which does the same job. Nature is using another two kinds of software doing the same job. So we have these tools to use to identify AI-generated images. Some results show they are very promising. They are kind of useful, but still, as of today, we cannot say they are reliable because the internal assessment report is not available yet. And some publishers used the software to check all the submissions, and they did not find any AI-generated image. So either the authors were ethical enough or the software just failed to do the job. We don't know yet. Besides the content, besides the text, AI generated images, and another issue we're facing today is that this technology may be a legal and ethical minefield for us. We all know when we got the output from these chatbots, they never tell us where the original content is from. The original source, we don't know. So if without that information, if we just use the output in our publications, we may be violating somebody's copyrights or even IP rights. And these two terms are legal matters. So that's why we say this technology could be a legal minefield. That's why some publishers like STM asked readers not to upload published articles to AI platforms so that the publishers could protect their copyright. And also, like APA also mentioned that if we do that, if the published article include participants' privacy, some personal information, or sensitive information, uploading these articles to AI platforms could impact the participants' privacy. Well, as we individual authors, researchers are being told not to do it, some publishers, major publishing houses like Taylor Francis, Wiley, and Oxford University Press, they're selling the assets to the articles to AI companies like Microsoft AI as part of the training data. And some researchers got really, really mad about this. However, at this point, as authors, we may not have that much bargaining power if we have already transferred the copyright ownership to the publisher. As the owner of the copyright, the publisher may have the right to do it. I'm not expert in terms of copyright law, so if any colleague has information about this, please share more information with us in the Q&A. Okay, well, what we can do right now as individual researchers to safeguard our IP and sensitive data involved in our research, try to minimize the risks that we're facing. So a computer scientist gave these suggestions, and the third and the fourth one may require some coding skills and computer science knowledge. So they may not be feasible for all of us, but we can check out the other three. In the first place, we should think about, do we really need AI for our research, or say, now at least our publications? If we do need it, we got to implement some safeguards like hosting data locally or not uploading the detailed results to the AI platform. Let AI do the job first and then put the data or results back on, and then send the manuscript straight directly to the publisher. Last but not least, we should voice our concerns, because this conversation, this debate is still going on and it has a long way to go. It involves different stakeholders, publishers, attorneys, editors, reviewers, authors, and everybody, AI companies. It requires our collective efforts to figure out a way to use this technology effectively and ethically. Well, maybe some of our colleagues already know this, but I'll mention this very quickly. Another issue that AI poses to us in terms of research publication is authorship issue. So according to authorship definition, all the authors should be responsible for all the aspects of the published article, in terms of, especially in terms of accuracy and integrity. But clearly, today's AI, Gen AI, this technology is not capable of this job. So all of researchers were like preprint server executive, co-founders, editor-in-chief, they all mentioned their concern at the very early stage, early 2023. Then publishing houses immediately released their statement saying, this technology and these tools cannot be used or cannot be listed as authors. Okay, and the Committee on Publication Ethics made it very clear through their position statement saying, this technology cannot take responsibility, cannot assert, cannot manage, and human authors should take the full responsibility. STM summarizes the general use of AI, what we can do, what we cannot do in terms of research publications. And this is a general practice. Like, if we use this technology for editing alone, then we don't have to disclose it and we don't need to get permission from the editor. But this is general rule. Some publishers have specific requirements, like APA said, well, no matter what kind of use we're using AI for, this use should be acknowledged in a methodology session following certain template. And Taylor and Francis made it clear that any use of AI should be mentioned in acknowledgement or methodology session. So for authors, we just need to, currently at this moment, a lot of publishers, they have very specific section on their website called AI policy. And in that section, they tell authors, even editors, reviewers, how to deal with any matters related to AI involved in research publications. Then besides those challenges or limitations issues, AI also poses some other issues. I bet the other colleagues already mentioned a lot. And I'll leave these WHO's ethical principles for use of AI for health practices and research, just leave it there. At the end, I mentioned a lot about the challenges and limitations, but I personally am not against this technology. I remember when a publisher told me, well, our office, our company we want to ban AI, but we cannot do it. Okay, technically it's not possible. So we just go with the flow. So we say, well, we don't want to be part of the road. We want to be part of the steamroller. As a engineering person, I say AI is not good or bad. It's just a technology. Whether it does good or bad to us, it depends on us, how we use it. So the choice is in our hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. So there are lots of comments agreeing with your points in the chat.
Yeah.
We have a question here. How are researchers who follow the rules on plagiarism versus those who are subjecting their manuscript to AI tools for checking protected? Where do we draw the line?
I'm sorry.
Do you want me to repeat the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, the question was sent to me directly. So,
Oh, okay.
how are the researchers who follow the rules on plagiarism, how are they protected versus those who subject their manuscript to AI tools for checking? So where do we draw the line?
So, so it's about the issue concerning that if somebody got the content output from AI platform, which causes plagiarism issue.
I think the question is if they just follow the rules on plagiarism versus if they use AI tools to check their manuscript. Those who just follow the rules are more at a disadvantage, I think, because there's no AI to help them. So if they committed plagiarism
Oh, okay.
accidentally, how
So
are they protected?
some people just do everything themselves, just trying really hard to avoid plagiarism issues 100%, but the other people are using AI
Yeah.
AI platforms to do that. Sorry, I'm just trying to think. Well, how to draw the line? Honestly, I don't see a clear line here, but technically, as an author myself, what we can do is that maybe sometimes we need this technology to help us edit our manuscript. After that, I encourage myself and my students to do plagiarism checking themselves. Like in our university, we have two software to do that. Students can use them. But yeah, that's one thing. And another thing is that it's kind of tricky. I always try to write everything myself. And in case I need AI to help me polish my manuscript, after polishing, if I see any word sentences kind of really far different from my writing and very specific, I'll definitely be very careful about that. So that will matches with what UNESCO tells us in the guidance. We always need to critically assess what AI gives us.
Thank you. Another question is, how about rejecting or accepting a paper if it discloses the use of AI? Could that affect the decision in any way?
Rejecting editors' decisions about
Yes.
rejecting or accepting paper if a paper is using AI for writing. Well, today we don't, at least at this moment, we haven't found any publishers or editors. They totally just simply reject a paper just because that paper uses AI. I believe most publishers, they give very detailed guidance regarding how to use AI. Like AI images, if the software or in some other way the publishers, editors, they found fake images, then the reviewers will have a reason to ask the authors to justify, explain, or even just reject the manuscript. So I don't think the editors can reject the paper, just simply say AI just this one reason. They may see we use AI, we're not using AI, but that's the starting point. Then the editors, reviewers, they need to check, see if the AI is ethically, or is the author following the guidance or something? So it's not simply saying, oh, he uses AI or not. AI is just a tool. So it's not like yes or no. Just still human beings, whether we're using it ethically or not.
Okay. Thank you. Well, a related question. I think you have answered this also. Are there rules for publishers if the author somehow used AI in their work, especially for works that have royalty fees? Do you know of any other rules regarding this for
Rules
publishers?
for all publishers, rules for authors in terms of how to use AI?
Yeah.
A lot of publishers have those guidance on their websites now, but some publishers, they even don't put these guidance in their author guidelines. We noticed that some after author's guidelines, and maybe the publishers want this section to stand out and want people to pay attention, they have specific section called the AI policy. Yeah. So, but in that section, they have different subsections for different stakeholders, reviewers, editors, and authors.
So one final question. In the absence of laws and regulations on the ethical use of AI, how can researchers ensure that AI use does more good than harm in research?
It's a big question. I think the bottom line is, first of all, as human beings, we have to be ethical first. Then we'll know how to use the technology ethically, because AI is not anything bad. It's just a technology. It's something neutral. Yeah. And especially when we're talking about public health or medical research, we need to, those, just my personal thought, like the Bellman report, protection of participants, they still stand. Those policies still stand. So no matter how we use AI, we still need to consider those guidance in our mind. And there are different points. And also talking about research publications, as we mentioned earlier, do we really need it for our research publications? I'm not talking about using AI to conduct research. I'm thinking about the publication ethics. I mean, my personal view is that before the end of 2022, we already published a lot of papers. So today, do we really need it? Okay, so there are several points that several safeguards we should start thinking from the beginning till the end. Yeah, just my personal thought.
Thank you so much, Kate. Back to you, Mellissa.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, so hopefully we'll all be publishing lots of research. So, so we needed to know, think about these issues as we're starting to write. So let's move on to our fourth speaker for this evening. Dr. Peter Tsai is the Assistant Vice President for Digital Transformation at the University of the Philippines. He's an associate professor in the Department of Philosophy, the chairman of the Private Experts Group in eHealth in the Department of Health and the Department of Science and Technology. He also works as an independent consultant for the Philippines National Ethics Committee and is a member of the Philippine Health Research Ethics Board Committee on Information Dissemination, Training, and Advocacy. He was also a research fellow in ethical issues and international research at the School of Public Health at Harvard University. His current interests include AI ethics and governance, data privacy, open data, research ethics, digital humanities, ethical issues in genomics, medical tourism, and forensic ethics. And he is the co-founder of the UP Social Innovations Lab. Thank you so much for being here to speak to us.
Thank you, Mellissa and colleagues. Thank you for having me. I'm the fourth speaker. Many of the points made by the early presenters resonate with me, so I apologize if I tend to repeat or rephrase the earlier presentation. So this is my slides. So basically what I just want to do is to present some kind of a framework or develop or help develop a framework for an AI-driven health research. And admittedly, this is Philippine-centric, given my experience in ethics review and in building capacity for researchers in the country. I've been helped by my research assistants, even if the points here made here seem to be rather synoptic or high level as opposed to really drill down. So perhaps in the conversations we'll have after the presentation we'll have a more detailed discussion on some points I raised. So we are the current legal framework for AI application in healthcare is basically governed by our data privacy law, which was done in 2012. Obviously, that is pre-AI, but it's foundational. But obviously, it's getting more and more cumbersome, insufficient, both from the point of view of regulators who are have to review all these complexities, all these varieties of AI powered research, but also on the part of researchers who are making it, finding it difficult to do research because of the Privacy Act. It seems like a straitjacket for them. So we have these rules for collection, processing, storage, and sharing of personal data, but that's about it. No. The one major limitation of this is really the enforcement, because even if you say there's privacy law that is clear and unambiguous, there's simply a lack of resources for AI oversight. And as you know, AI oversight, especially if you're tapping into a live stream of data and process this algorithmically, like in social media, there's no way for NPC or National Privacy Commission to regulate that. And so disclosures mechanisms of the law, stipulated with the law tend to be reactive, so that, for instance, the 72-hour breach notification is just not good enough, because the algorithmic harm tend to be a continuing crime, so to speak, for lack of better word. So the harm inflicted on people would not be a snapshot, and you cannot time that there's going to be like 72 hours after that. No, compliance oriented rather than outcomes focused. There is so much emphasis on compliance, but it's more like paperwork rather than simply but rather than being focused on desirable outcomes. That parties would agree. There are also institutional gaps. I helped our Philippine Health Research Ethics Board. That's the national body that regulate research activities in the country. But then it also came from an earlier era that is not necessarily conversant. I mean, the people from that era are not necessarily conversant with AI. So serious capacity deficit and institutional gaps are at play here. So ethics committee lacks AI expertise. That is obvious. So the issues raised by early presenters could well play in the realm of ethics review. Guidelines don't address algorithmic opacity and dataset biases. There's not much expertise in that area. So that regulatory efforts in our country are pretty much band-aid on specific problems rather than robust framework. I had an opportunity to help frame the AI governance framework for the country, but it seems that it's trickling its way down to the to the ethics review mechanisms of our research institutions. So there's a fundamental tension beyond procedures. Now, on the one hand, there's continuation of there's the more prevailing in the literature we call data colonialism. The Filipino workers would label data that basically the big tech companies would train their models on and refine and so on and so forth. But well, Filipinos themselves also are contributing directly or indirectly to the data sets of our big tech masters. No, so there's much extraction going on without proportional benefits. So as a matter of fact, it's more you can make the argument it's doing more good, more harm than good. No, especially with big events like elections. So Cambridge Analytica, for instance, you've heard of that incident, of that controversy. Philippines was ground zero. No? Digital divide amplification. There is so much digital divide in the country, exacerbated by our geography, our rural-urban divide, our socioeconomic differences. No? So fragmented AI governance can leave vulnerable even more at risk. So it's the claim, and I agree with that claim because I see it firsthand that the poor, the uneducated would appear to be powerless in before um, the enormous power of AI at play, even via their cell phones. So there's also profit motivation, obviously, versus public health priorities. We see this during the pandemic playing out. Many of our countries, they did not exactly drink bleach, but they had compounds meant for horses, and so many of them died. But as you can see, social media is very much powered by emotion rather than facts and science. And so what tends to spread would be so-called fake news and fake health information that tend to be deleterious, harmful to our people. There are also going to be, and there is already an ongoing professional displacement concerns in our different sectors, especially workers. But we'll leave that for another day because the counter argument would be that for jobs killed by AI, many more jobs will be created. But it seems like we are falling behind the adoption curve because the gap between loss of job and getting a new one could be rather wide. No? So there's also a tendency to erase indigenous knowledge, and that is not necessarily AI's fault. We have many languages. The Philippines has over 70 ethno-linguistic groups, depending on how you count them. It could run up to hundreds, but many of these are really dying languages. And they are well overpowered by mass media, more so with the advent of social media powered by AI. No? So the Philippines and many developing countries don't have the legal or infrastructural muscle to protect their most vulnerable populations from algorithmic exploitation, short of corralling them or putting them putting them in caves. No, they are unable to survive. No, so I work closely, for instance, with an ethnic group called Mamanwas. They have less than 7,000 speakers, and they could not survive because the estimate for a language to survive, you need to have at least 20,000 speakers, and they're sure going to die. But it's a rich language that is no way going to survive the onslaught of media and the adoption of the use of their kids by use of their kids of social media. So there's also question of redistributive justice mechanisms, benefit sharing requirements. We see this as a requirement in the good old-fashioned clinical trial. Even at least for many trials, they're just lip service. But we have this in the books, in the regulation. But in the in the advent of AI, increasingly AI research would not, with researchers or even sponsors, would not necessarily be amenable to this. No, it's hard to implement, especially if you're talking about big data. You're talking about data that flows naturally, so-called, in communities, around communities, and onto social media platforms. But there are alternatives. One would be data commons model with community governance. I have yet to see a community successful in doing this. If you're familiar with data privacy, there are proposals for data co-ops. I have yet to see that succeeding, or privacy as service, and things are not necessarily promising with respect to AI, or use of AI of AI's use of Filipino data. Localization requirements addressing Philippine health priorities. We have that in our guidelines, but with the advent of AI, where services are hosted elsewhere, our data are processed elsewhere, it's getting more and more difficult to impose this kind of requirement. No. So how AI-driven health innovations align with ethical, legal, and scientific standards while advancing public health is a serious test that we have to pass. No? In terms of participatory governance, we hope to be able to see community ethics councils with decision-making powers. In a sense, this is happening in tribal communities where the certain tribes are empowered, but with the advent of AI, even the more educated ones would not necessarily be ready for this, because AI is still mysterious to them, no? And one of our efforts really is to try to demystify AI so that people can get a good handle on its operations, and be able to discuss AI more intelligently. Representation of marginalized communities with substantive authority, that is an aspiration for us. Inclusive design methodologies, not just consultation. We'll see how much of our efforts could incorporate this in our review. Building on FREB's existing structure while ensuring, which ensures that research involving human participants is conducted responsibly. Hopefully, we will be able to achieve this as well. Takes time, but something that we persistently pursue. So there are also structural safeguard concerns. One would be independent AI safety board, which investigate with investigative powers. We see this successfully implemented in some other territories like Singapore, but not so much yet in the Philippines, for various reasons, structural, administrative wise. No, we also have concerns about the algorithmic impact assessments focusing on vulnerable populations. As I said, we have more dramatic cases like elections, where certain information, certain news are being spread like wildfire, and it's affecting certain chances of certain candidates. And finally, the notion of, or the aspect of mandatory registry of AI of health AI systems with open auditing. This is a proposal only so far, because of to begin with, there are regulatory limitations that we have regulatory limitations, and so structural safeguards is not even yet in the near future. No, it's in the horizon, but it takes time to get to see this happen. Expansion of existing requirements where companies, institutions, government agencies handle personal data. This is already in the current regulation. Appointment of data protection officer to oversee compliance. Conduct of privacy impact assessment to evaluate risk. We have to upskill here because our DPOs are not necessarily equipped with the right tools to evaluate risk given AI models, given AI applications, given AI integration uh, in in decision support for management for companies. Uh, Implementation of security measures to protect personal information, something that we hope to achieve, but um, not yet there. We're not quite there yet. So in closing, we see the need for a more decolonialized approach to AI ethics. We see powerful big tech companies essentially dictating what we can have as a country, as users. To them, we're primarily just users, consumers of AI products. We also see the need to anchor AI research on Filipino values, needs, and priorities. This is something that we have to discuss in greater detail as we continue with our journey to deal with AI, to ensure ethical framework serving our country. Our hope is to have a more thorough, more meaningful impact assessment, privacy impact assessment, not merely as a bureaucratic exercise, but really to safeguard our people, to ensure that our people understand their data, how their data is stored, used, and they aren't left unprotected once that such data changes hands. So I'll end my presentation here. If you have questions, I'll be glad to hear them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was the perfect, I think, ending, thinking about governance and how we move forward with these. So we have a couple of questions for you. The first one is, AI governance and protection emanate from a position of power, especially if they involve the implementation of laws or establishing legal frameworks. How can those without power and control protect themselves from the harms of AI use?
Yeah, there are fundamental mechanisms that we need to activate before we can even exercise power, or let's think of one. And we can look at the Finland model, and that is to conduct AI education for at least 10% of your population, where you have a critical mass of people who are articulate what they really desire, what they hope to advance, given the onslaught of AI. And I'm not, I say onslaught, but I use AI myself. So there. Power is something that you negotiate, hopefully, more through our levers of governance, of government, and through public education. So we'll see some changes in a couple of years, because it's an imperative anyway. Because if you don't assert yourself uh, in the scheme of things, you're just going to be overrun by AI. I hope that makes sense to you.
Yes, thank you. And you talked about algorithmic impact assessments. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's really about privacy impact assessment, which is already part of our law, modeled after the Europeans, no, GDPR. But the idea is that there's an algorithmic impact on people, no. So algorithmic bias can have impact on perpetuating certain biases, certain biases, certain certain views that are deleterious to certain communities. For instance, we have dramatic cases of communities that are affected by lubag. It's dystonia Parkinsonism, and it's associated with certain. It's a genetic condition that are associated with a certain race group, no, or certain certain provinces with certain genetic background, but it's amplified. It's a weird mix of science and superstition, And so in some circles, if that gets to be amplified by algorithm, and the bias is towards clickbaits, and that would even make suffering more difficult for our compatriots.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Great presentation. Okay, well, unfortunately, we have come to the end of this session and the end of this webinar series. I certainly found it really fascinating. This is not my area of expertise, but I think we can all agree that AI is here to stay and we'll all be using it. So I would like to just have a couple of announcements to make for you all. First of all, I'd like to thank once again our speakers for today and for last week as well. That really, really fascinating. So much expertise shared with us. So thank you so much. Thank you also to data.org for your sponsorship, to Leander, Marquez, and the other co-chairs for leading the working group on bioethics, and for our APRU Secretariat for your support of the Global Health Program and our initiatives. Two more things to mention, I think. One is, I wanted to let you know, if you belong to an APRU member institution, we have our 10th annual APRU virtual global health case competition. Registration is now open. Oh, it's hard to see the yellow, but the challenge will be released on March 14th. Just a little hint, because I can't tell you exactly what the challenge is, but I can tell you that it relates to AI and many of the topics that we've talked about today. So I hope that you will encourage your students to participate, and maybe we could put the link to the website into the chat. So I hope you will do that. I also put a link in the chat to our website for this event, which I'll tell you more in a second. Also, our annual conference this year is being held at the University Malaya in Kuala Lumpur. The theme is towards planetary health equity, a global call for shared solutions. Including in like the 5 main topics, we have bioethics, and we have technology, digital technologies. The conference is held in the end of October, very end of October. So make sure to keep a lookout for that. Finally, for those who qualify, the certificates of participation will be sent out within 3 weeks, hopefully sooner. But I have a student, a volunteer who works on that. And we will be posting the recordings of both sessions on the APRU website that I typed into the chat in the next week. I think last week's session will be going up soon. And then we'll post the recording from today as well. Some of the speakers have asked us not to share their slides. So we can't do that, but we can post a recording. All right, well, I know we're out of time now. So thank you once again. Lovely to see you all. Please take care, and I hope to see you at another APRU Global Health event soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, Mellissa. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
See you. Okay, bye.
Okay. Take care, everybody. Nice to see you, King. I see so many familiar names. King, lovely to see you all. Take care.
Thank you very much. See you next time.
See you next time. Bye-bye. Thanks, Eric. Lovely to have you.
Thank you, Mellissa. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Goodbye.